Hey, everybody, it's Wednesday evening, 7 p.m. Central. Welcome to the Hang Up. Oh, what a weird screen display I've got where there's like, I see half of Jim. That's funny. I don't know what you guys see. It's extra funny because I saw all of Jim, then I see half of Jim. That's so good. So now we know, you guys know who's here. But before we bring Jim in to actually talk about stuff, yeah, I'm alive. I'm awake. We did a 6-hour election night coverage live stream last night right here. And today we're in part going to be back to some business as usual, talking. By the way, the phone lines are open, and any theist, anybody who has any supernatural beliefs, anybody has any beliefs politically or whatever that they suspect that I disagree with or that Jim disagrees with, by all means, call in. We have some open lines right now, and we'll be taking calls fairly soon. But I wanted to go through what's happened in the election since 1 o'clock this morning. And 1 o'clock this morning when we stopped doing it. Right now, I'm going with CNN projections. I realize New York Times has slightly different numbers. But the United States Senate is basically locked with 49 Republicans and 48 Republicans is the current projected thing. And there are only a couple of seats out, basically Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada. Georgia is where Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker jousted and went to essentially a tie. There's going to be a runoff election in Georgia on December 6th, which means everybody who showed up and voted now this week needs to do that again on December 6th. And they will not be able to, 81,131 of them that previously voted for the third party candidate will not be able to vote for that candidate. And so that candidate will be dismissed. And they're doing the runoff because nobody got to 50% or over 50% of the vote. Raphael Warnock right now is ahead. It's about 17,500 votes out of almost 2 million. Both of them have 1.9 million votes. Is the projected number right now, with 99% of the vote in. And there's not enough vote still left out there to put anybody over the 50%. So December 6th, there'll be a runoff election, which means between now and December 6th, just as we did last year, we will be, despite the fact that I don't live in Georgia, we will be encouraging people to get out to vote and encourage others to get out to vote, specifically for Raphael Warnock. I'm going to have a few things to say because I find it incredibly troubling to wake up in a world where Herschel Walker, who is not remotely the type of person that I would think should be reasonably considered for a Senate seat, both because he's a liar and a hypocrite, and because he's not particularly bright. He's just running on the Trump MAGA coattail thing. And no matter how unimpressive you think Raphael Warnock is, we've gotten to the point where we're just electing some of the most bizarre, unintelligent, tinfoil hat wearing personalities. And I think it's because it's just they hate the libs. Let's just keep going. And so right now, Arizona, the Democratic incumbent, Kelly, is leading over Masters with only about 73% of the vote in. Arizona and Nevada are really slow in getting their votes counted and reported. It was this way last time as well. But in the Senate race, the Democrat in Arizona is winning, and that'll take Democrats to 49. And the Republican in Nevada is winning over the incumbent. So Nevada, it looks like a Senate seat that they may actually flip, which is interesting because there's only one flipped seat in Senate races so far, and that was Fetterman beating Oz in Pennsylvania. That flipped and would have potentially put the Dems at 51. But to counter that, it looks like they're going to flip Nevada, and that will put them at 50. And we may end up in a 50-49 position where whoever wins the Senate seat in Georgia will determine control of the House. Because if it's 50-50, the Dems maintain control because the vice president breaks ties. But if it's 51-49, that fundamentally changes. And so if the current Senate race seats in Nevada and Arizona play out as it appears they're going to, then everything's going to come down to another vote on December 6th for that Senate seat. In the House, though, it's a slightly different story. Right now, you need 218 seats to control the House. The Republicans have 207 locked in. The Democrats have 187 locked in. So they picked up 4 seats, and the Republicans have picked up 15 seats. There's a really great map at CNN.com that'll let you go and look at which seats were flipped and for which ones. For example, the Wisconsin's 3rd House district flipped, but it's a part of it's because there wasn't an incumbent. It's really interesting to me to watch how incumbents are more likely to win because people are resistant to change, I suspect. But where we've flipped seats, both Republican and Democrat, it was on more than one occasion, it was where there was no incumbent. And so what needs to happen right now is for the Republicans to take the House. They need 8 seats of the ones that are competitive. And if I look at the races that are listed there and where they stand, they are leading in like 3 or 4 of those, but not 8. But in many cases, it's still, believe it or not, too early. Some of the races have been called, like Ohio's 13th district between Sykes and Gesiotto Gilbert. With 92% of the vote, the Democrats are going to maintain that seat. And I don't have the knowledge or understanding to go through all 435 House seat races and know what's going on. It's hard enough for me to even pay attention to what's going on in Texas, where I live or currently live. And the governor thing, they put up an interesting list of, we have 24 Republican governors and 22 Democratic governors, and we're looking at these races that are left. The only outstanding races for governor are Alaska, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon. The rest of them weren't up. And so in Alaska, it's starting to look like with 72% of the vote that the Republican candidate, Dunleavy, will be governor. But it hasn't been called yet. And in Arizona, it's basically a tie, 50.2% to 49.8%. There's 8,000 votes out of 2 million separating them, while at 73% between Hobbs and Lake. I'm just baffled at Lake should have been run over, metaphorically, in a landslide. This is an absolute conspiracy theorist, just, rimming Donald Trump nonstop and spreading lies and misinformation about election fraud. And yet the race is not just too close to call, but not outside the realm of possibility that she could actually win this. Similarly, in Nevada, the incumbent, Sisolak, is losing to Lombardo. Now, we only have 80% of the vote in, and we don't know where it's from. But in that race, Lombardo is 39,000 votes ahead, with 20% of the vote still out. And 20% of the vote is like 90,000 votes. And so Sisolak would have to get 60 some odd percent of those, I think, if my back of the envelope map is there, in order to maintain that seat. And so that may be a governor's seat that flips. Now, a lot of people, and I'm not going to go through all the rest of them right now, but people were asking last night, what difference does it make how many governors there are, how many Republican and Democratic governors there are? That's not the federal, that's not going to impact federal House and Senate votes, not directly. And yet it will, in the sense that if there's a Democratic or Republican governor, that's going to control what the secretaries of state in those states are allowed to do, what they're allowed to do with regard to elections. It's going to control what the individual House and Senate within each state does. And those things have a rippling effect in much the same way that we've said many times before. If you're going to run for office, sometimes running for the smaller offices like State Board of Education, School Board, the local elections, there's real stuff that happens in the local elections. I didn't see who won the Austin mayor election. I should probably pull up the Austin election results. I looked at Texas and I looked at the national ones. I did not look at the results for Austin and the two bills that were there. I'll pull those up in a little bit. But there's still races for the Secretary of State in both Arizona and Nevada that are currently open. And in Arizona, the Democrat is leading, and in Nevada, the Republican is leading. And the Secretary of States for those are going to be the ones that handle the elections. And when you have a handful of secretaries of state who have bought into a conspiracy theory without sufficient evidence that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen, and they can make that claim about this one and the next one and the next one and the next one, then you have secretaries of state that can start making changes in how voting occurs and how votes are counted and all sorts of things that can impact elections dramatically. It goes far beyond just the gerrymandering, which is already a huge problem. Lastly, before I get Jim in here to talk about stuff and we start taking calls, I wanted to run through the propositions that Jimmy and I, we didn't wager any money, but we went through each of these propositions and we decided which ones we agreed on, which ones we disagreed on, and what we thought was going to happen. And in every one where we disagreed, except for one, Jimmy was correct, and there's another one where we don't know the answer yet. So I'm just going to assume that he's going to be correct on that one too, in which case he will have taken 5 of the 6, and I will have only taken 1, which was Nebraska's minimum wage. And I think there were a couple where we were wrong. California 26th and 27th, we were definitely wrong. So let me look at these ballot measures real quick. You have Arizona Prop 309, which was to enact stricter voter ID requirements. We don't yet have a result on that, but it's sitting at 50% opposed. Then you have Arkansas 4, which was to legalize recreational marijuana. That failed. I thought it would pass. The Missouri one did pass, so I was right about at least one of them. California Prop 1, guaranteeing constitutional right to abortion, passed overwhelmingly. Here's the good news out of yesterday. Not only did Fetterman flip the Pennsylvania Senate seat, which puts pressure on these other seats that we already talked about, but Democrats did better than expected. There wasn't a great red wave, except in Florida, where I think it's fair to call what happened in Florida pretty much a red wave. But everywhere where there was a ballot initiative about abortion, they all went the right way, right from my perspective and from anybody who values choice. And that is, they either specifically guaranteed a constitutional right to abortion, or they shot down attempts to denounce that. And so California Prop 1 is one of those. 65% of the vote, about 3.5 almost million voters. And that's only with 47% of the vote counted. But it's so far ahead that it's already been projected that this is what the result will be. Props 26 and 27 in California were about legalizing sports betting and legalizing online sports betting. Those both failed, and they failed huge. Like the 26 that was legalized sports betting on tribal lands, 70% almost voted no. And on the online sports betting, 83% voted no. Connecticut question 1 allowed for early voting. That one passed 59% is the current projection. In Iowa, Amendment 1 was establishing a state constitutional right to bear arms. No surprise, it passed 65% to 34%. This is one of those ones of kind of fear mongering. Like, if the federal constitution overturns the Second Amendment, I want my state constitution to protect that right. Okay, cool. Until the federal Second Amendment's overturned, the Iowa one has no real impact that I'm aware of. Kentucky Amendment 2 was to try to state that the Constitution of Kentucky that nothing in the Constitution shall be construed to secure or protect a right to abortion or requiring the funding of abortion. So a yes vote would have supported changing the Constitution to state there is no right to abortion, and a no vote opposed changing the Constitution. And the no's won out there 52%. So the specific language, it would have been an extra hurdle, because now, in addition to, what you are and aren't permitted to do, they would have specifically said the Kentucky Constitution cannot be construed to protect a constitutional right to abortion. And the fact that that failed means that there may be a legal precedent, I don't know, not a lawyer, to suggest that perhaps it does, or that the people would support a constitutional right to protect abortion. It's a really tight race there. Maryland 4 was legalized recreational weed, and that passed, no surprise. Michigan 3 was a constitutional right to abortion, and that passed 56.7% to 43%. That particular measure established an individual right to reproductive freedom, including the right to make all decisions about pregnancy and abortion, and allow the state to regulate abortion in some cases. Michigan has a 1931 law that essentially bans abortion in the state, but as of mid-October, that law is being blocked by the courts. So a yes vote supported adding this right to abortion, and a no vote opposes adding the right to abortion. And because the yes is going to have it, the thinking is that the current stay of the courts will continue, and the Constitution essentially will guarantee a right to abortion, and therefore the ban, or the trigger law, the law that went into effect from 1931, will not go into effect. Michigan 2 was expanding voting access and policies. We don't yet know for sure if that's going to pass, but it looks like it might. It's at 60% right now. It's weird that one hasn't been called. Missouri 3 was to legalize weed in Missouri recreationally, and that passed. Montana 131 requires medical aid for infants born alive. This was an attempt to make abortion effectively illegal without ever really mentioning it. And it's a way to try to manipulate and spin things. Specifically, it was the Born Alive Infant Protection Act, which provides that any infant that is born alive, including infants born alive after an abortion, are legal persons and requires healthcare providers to take the necessary actions to preserve the life of a born alive infant. Essentially, this would have been eliminating most abortions, or many abortions, without ever mentioning it, other than, say, an infant that's born alive after abortion. It went through specifically in defining what an alive infant is. That failed, which it should have, where I was hoping it would. It has failed 52%, 47. North Dakota Measure 2 was the legal recreation marijuana. I suspected it would pass. It did not. 54.9% of people in North Dakota so far have voted to shoot down the devil's lettuce. Nebraska 432 was to require a photo ID for voting. That passed overwhelmingly. 433 in Nebraska was to increase the Nebraska minimum wage to $15 an hour. That also passed overwhelmingly, and it takes effect in 2026. But beyond that, the minimum wage will be adjusted annually to account for increasing the cost of living. So it basically builds to 15 over the next 4 years. So it's not great, but it's better than if it had been shot down. Nevada question 3, we still don't have an answer on, which is ranked choice voting in open primaries, but it's winning now. And the Nevada question 2, which was to increase the Nevada minimum wage to $12 an hour. We don't have an answer on that either, but it's winning. In Ohio, issue 2 was to require U.S. citizenship to vote in local elections. That won overwhelmingly, 77%. Oregon 111 and Oregon 114, which are establishing a right to health care and requiring a permit to buy firearms and high-capacity magazines. We do not have a result on that yet. South Dakota's 27 was to legalize recreational marijuana. That failed, so North Dakota and South Dakota shot it down. So basically you have North Dakota, South Dakota. I'm not sure what the status is in Iowa, but in Missouri it's legal, and in Arkansas it's not. So as you're driving up and down there, you be careful crossing state lines. Vermont Proposal 5, which was a constitutional guarantee to the right to abortion, passed overwhelmingly, 76.7% with 95% reporting. This is, I think, the good news takeaway. I went into this yesterday saying, hey, I don't want to be pessimistic, but I am also not optimistic. I'm expecting the worst. I expected us to lose the House. I expected us to lose the Senate. By us, I mean Democrats. I expected most of the initiatives just weren't going to go the right way. And I'm still incredibly disappointed. I'm disappointed that we have people who aren't particularly knowledgeable, aren't particularly qualified. They're eligible to run, but they're not qualified to do anything. Either winning or having incredibly close races. When they're spouting conspiracy theory stuff, when they are spouting election fraud lies, and that there wasn't a massive wave of people. We lost the Supreme Court, and we lost a woman's right to choose, or pregnant person's right to choose. And the Supreme Court's lost for a long time. This loss of Roe should have been everybody come out and turn this blue, and there wasn't. I haven't seen final numbers on turnout yet. I'll look that up when I look up the Austin results. But we're sitting here, and the best thing I can say is that we may still have lost the House. We may still have lost the Senate. We're waiting for a runoff election to find out about the Senate. And the only thing that we did right is a couple of states managed to increase some protections for abortion rights. And a couple of places got some weed. I mean, I'd give up every place with weed forever for the rest of time. I would burn down and destroy and not inhale every weed plant on the planet if it meant unfucking the courts, if it meant unfucking our electoral system, if it meant actually ungerrymandering districts that allow minority positions to win out. But then, I'm not the world's biggest weed advocate anyway. It's like, oh, we're going to take away human rights, but let's throw them a bone and let them, ease their suffering with some weed. It's strange to me. But two weeks ago, before I realized we were going to still be doing election coverage, I should have done the math. I asked Jim Barrows to come on because Jim and I haven't been able to do a show in a while. So Jim, how are you feeling about this? Was this better than expected for you? Was this worse than expected for you? Are you optimistic at all?
A little bit better than I expected. And I think one of I read an interesting analysis. I think it was on PolitiFact or Real Clear Politics, that pointed out that for the most part, anybody who is an out Trump supporter, MAGA person, didn't do as well. And either lost their election, with a few exceptions, but either lost their election or almost lost their election, and it was just really too close when they shouldn't have been that close. And the author was saying that this is pretty much a repudiation of Trump. And then I see some headlines where, more Republicans are speaking out against Trump today than they were yesterday. So I think those are some good things to come out of this, that having Trump in your corner is not going to be as effective. And so hopefully that means more people will stop listening to him and will stop having to hear him melt down in public, and talk about himself in public all the time. So hopefully that'll happen. But I think any state that's voting for ranked choice is good. So to hear that, did you say Nevada had passed that or was getting close to passing that? That's good news right there. I think it's the best news. Yeah. And I think more states need to do that. That'll get rid of the gerrymandering problem. Because that's what a lot of this is. I think a lot of Texas is gerrymandered. We know a lot of Arizona is gerrymandered, just from my living there for so long. So I think, overall, I think it's not as positive as I think we had hoped, but it's more positive than it could have been. I would really love to see some of the turnout numbers, because I am hearing, like someone pointed out in the chat earlier,
I got him.
That the under 40 crowd is what kept this from turning into a red wave. That we had more young people voting than we have in a while. And if that's true, that's awesome. So yeah, I think overall, there's more hope today than there was, the day after this time than there was in the previous election, I think.
So I've got some of those numbers that I get looked up while you're doing this. First of all, for anybody interested in the Austin mayoral race, there will be a runoff on December 13th for Austin mayor between, I think it's Celia Israel and Kirk Watson. There were several people who ran for Austin mayor, and nobody got more than 50%. And so those were the top two. So they'll have a runoff race on December 13th, I think. But here's the sad thing. While I don't have demographic voter turnout by age groups, so we don't know how much credit we can or can't give Gen Z or whatever else, I have a map that shows the 2022 votes cast as a share of the voting eligible population. And so, for example, in Texas, the 2018 midterms, 45% of the eligible population turned up to vote. In the 2020 general election, 60% or 60.7% turned up to vote. So 45 in the last midterm, 60 in this midterm. This midterm, 42.4%. 3% fewer eligible Texas voters turned out to the post-Roe midterms than showed up in 2018. And there are places where it's lower. In Mississippi, the 2018 midterms were 42.7%, and the 2020 general was 59.9%. And in Mississippi, 32% turned out to vote yesterday. In West Virginia, it was 33.8%. In Georgia, it was 52.3%. It was almost a tie with the 2018 midterms, but way down from the general. Now, we know the midterms always have fewer people show up than the general. But to have fewer people turn out in 2022 than turned out in 2018 is kind of shocking. Some places came out ahead, like in Maine, where we, no offense, but largely didn't really need a massive turnout in Maine. 63% made it to this midterm, as opposed to 58% in 2018. Similarly, New Hampshire went from 53% to 56%. Pennsylvania went from 51 to 56%. Michigan, and hoorah, I'm considering moving to Michigan. Michigan went way higher on my list today. In 2018 midterm, they had 56.5% turnout, and yesterday they had 58.7%. So that's an increase. Wisconsin came close. They pretty much tied their 2018. Minnesota was close. Montana was close. Oregon jumped hugely. 2018 midterms was 59.7%, and yesterday it was 68% in Oregon. In the 2020 general election, it was only 75%. So they split the difference and climbed in ahead of their 2018 performance. Even in California, though, they did slightly better than they did in 2018, but not a lot. And I'd love to see breakdown of this, by demographics, so we know not necessarily who to blame and who to congratulate for things, but it's like in the serious states like Arizona, more people turned out in Arizona this year than did in 2018. It went from 46.9% to 52%. In Nevada, it was an additional 3%. They went from 46 to 49%. So there are some states where we saw slightly better turnout than we did in 2018, but still it's low. And yeah, I don't know what to do about that.
And did you say Texas had actually had a decrease over the previous midterms?
Yeah, and 2018 midterm was 45%, and we went down to 42%.
Yeah, that's not. I don't know. That's enough to say that Texas is efforts to decrease voter turnout were effective. With a 3% drop like that. But it'd be interesting to see how much of that drop would be, was because people couldn't get to the voting polls or didn't get their votes counted because they were for out of state, et cetera.
There were
And those
13
kinds of things.
states. Yeah, I don't know what the cause is. I don't know if it was any voter suppression stuff. I'm just saying that turnout wasn't what it was expected or what I would have liked for it to have been. There were 13 states where more people showed up yesterday than showed up in 2018. I was hoping it would be closer to like 30 states where more people showed up yesterday than in 2018, because as cliche as it may sound, every single election that happens is the most important election of our life right now. This is the time we live in. The people who got complacent about some things, we already lost the Supreme Court and stuff. But those 13 states, by the way, so if you want to give a round of applause to the people who actually turned up more yesterday than they did in 2018, Hawaii, Arizona, Nevada, California, Utah, Oregon, South Dakota, Arkansas, Michigan, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, New Hampshire, and Maine. The Arkansas number is technically almost identical to the 2018 midterms. They went from 41% to 41.2%. And I'm gonna say that boost is only because legalization of marijuana was on the ballot in Arkansas, and it still failed.
Still failed.
So the 2% showed up, and it still failed. Well, before we get to calls, and I want to get on calls here real quick because this is a call-in show, and we're going to take calls. And by the way, anybody with super chats, $10 or more, we're going to read them all at the end of the show. Just out of curiosity, and if you don't have a plan, you don't have a plan. What do you think we need to do different to both get a larger turnout of liberal, progressive, more democratically minded voters in 2024? Because I suspect we're going to hear an announcement from Trump that he's running again. And I suspect we're going to hear an announcement from DeSantis, who just won Florida hugely. And so there will be a little fighting there, and we don't know what's going to happen. But as it stands right now, I'm not convinced that the Democrats have anyone who can beat either of them in 2024. And it's a good chunk of it's going to depend on turnout. So what are your thoughts on what we should do next?
We need to find a better candidate. I think the Democrats need to hold their nose and make a serious attempt at running Bernie. I think he's the only one that I know of that would stand a chance. AOC, if you get her to run, I think she could probably do it. But we just don't have anybody who's really that populist, that exciting. I mean, I think Biden won because Trump was so bad. I don't think that he won because he was that good. I just think that was just Trump being the worst. But I don't know. I think one of the things we need to do is we need to maybe get away for policy. We need to get away from calling it a Democrat or left-wing policy, because one of the interesting things that I've read on multiple occasions is if you just describe the policy, most people are for it. But if you call it a Democrat policy, most people are against it. And you don't have to change the words. All you have to do is put the word Democrat in front, and people will vote against it. So I think the Democrats need to, we need to kind of get away from that. And I think too, if we look at some of the more successful presidential runs like Obama, Reagan, et cetera, I don't remember either of them bashing their opponents as much as we've seen this time around in the midterms or even prior. I think you need to run on positive, ignore what your competition is doing to a large extent, don't bash them, and stay on a positive message about what you're going to do and have a plan. The Republicans, let's face it, ran on fear, uncertainty, doubt, and outright lying, and they did pretty good. So, I think we just need to keep running on that. But I think more importantly is to do things like you and I are doing here on this show, and to promote critical thinking wherever we can. Because, it's the number of conspiracy theorist senators and members of the House right now is staggering. Just that we have one is kind of staggering, but when you've got as many as we've got, and you kind of look around at state legislatures as well, and there's a staggering number of them there. I know Purse Dragon there in chat, he has a chance to talk to a lot of folks in the street, so to speak, and he pointed out earlier in chat that almost every Republican he knows is a conspiracy theorist of some kind. Where did that come from? And that just is bad critical thinking skills. And we need to make people, point out that caring about the truth matters, and finding out what the truth is matters. And how to do that, and how to evaluate sources, and how to evaluate claims, and all that just needs to start happening. And we also probably need to focus on getting people away from single issue voters. We need to have people recognize that, okay, yes, you're pro life, and that's okay, but the candidate you're voting for is a moron, believes in conspiracy theories, and is not going to do anything to help the economy, and has no plan to help the economy, and is going to vote against your Social Security, is going to vote against your Medicare, and vote against your Medicaid. If you depend on those programs, and the only reason you voted for a Republican is because they're pro-life, you shot yourself in the foot. And I don't think they see that. They can't get away from that one topic. And I think that's the one. Most of your one topic voters are probably abortion, on the abortion fence spectrum somewhere.
I have a fantasy idea that I don't want to go into. I'd rather talk to you and Jimmy and some other people kind of offline about this idea, because I think it's one of those ones where I have an idea, but if you say what the idea is, then everybody knows, oh, this is the plan, so we're just going to ignore it and say it won't work, etc. I don't know if I have any hard solutions on this. I will say, I'm glad you came on today, because it's been a while since we got to do something together. And Jimmy and I did this whole thing last night, and so I love hearing different perspectives, even where we agree. There's this slight different take on it, and so we've got a bunch of callers lined up. And if you are, in particular, a theist, we will do what we can to clear out some of these atheist callers so that we can get more theistic callers on there. But I want to start with Kara, pronouns are they, them, from North Carolina, who has a question for us about addressing issues about morality. So welcome, Kara. How are you?
Hi. Hello. I'm doing pretty good.
How can we help?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you. I can't believe the first caller. Okay. All right.
So go ahead.
So yeah, I had questions about So my entire family they're very very religious and everything. My brother, he's a staunch Republican and everything, and he always I don't know. I'm living with him right now, and it's kind of hard to like try to talk to him, try to get him to understand. I don't know, people on the left's views about abortion, and I don't know, and he has this idea that it's like my entire family has this idea that like all our morals come from the Bible, and if you're not a Bible believer, then you have no morals. And I'm trying to understand how exactly I can like explain to them how I don't know, like how almost aren't intrinsic to religion, but to like, I don't know, being human. Just like how societies, became, how they came to being, and they grew, and they saw what they liked and what they didn't like, and how, we decided you probably shouldn't be killing each other. That's not entirely nice, like I'm trying to understand how I can, like, the same thing goes with abortion and everything. Like they also turn to the Bible, well, like how God says, like how God is completely against it, but I don't see anywhere in the Bible. Like I have one right with me right now, and that says nothing about abortion or taking
Yeah.
baby's life whatsoever.
So, okay, let me make sure I'm understanding this correct, and I'll let Jim jump in on this, which is essentially you have family members who are saying morality comes from the Bible, and you're wanting to know the best way to push back on that.
Exactly.
Cool. Jim has ideas, I'm sure.
One or two. I think in a lot of cases, if you directly oppose somebody, they're simply going to dig in deeper on their position. And that's just kind of a natural human reaction that happens. So directly opposing it, I'm not sure is always the best idea. But also, before people are willing to understand you, you sometimes have to understand them more. So asking them questions about morals in the Bible. So one of the questions you could ask is, okay, so according to the Bible, what's worse, lying or murder? And then ask them to show you the chapter and verse on that. Because there isn't one. There is no chapter and verse that says which one is worse. All moral, transgressions are the same, and they all have the same punishment. And so part of that is just knowing what questions to ask and how to ask them. That some of that comes from knowing the Bible a little bit better. Some of that is knowing where you get your morals from and how you determine what's moral or isn't, or is not moral. And I think to also recognize that morals are an opinion of someone's action. Rocks falling is neither moral or immoral; they're just rocks falling. And if you see somebody hitting somebody else and you're trying to figure out if it's moral, you also have to understand context. And in a lot of cases, what you have in the Bible is rules without any context, and that doesn't always work. For instance, if you look at a lot of the antitrust laws that we have, we think those are moral, but where in the Bible do you get to antitrust laws from a biblical foundation? How do you get to any type of moral when we can right now, with the exception of humans, clone other animals pretty accurately? How do you do that with a human? When does it become okay? And then have them build that from a biblical foundation. And there's a lot of things that are we consider moral or immoral today that didn't exist back, in biblical times, whether it's planes, trains, or automobiles. What's moral? How would you use biblical principles to program a car's ability to determine to hit one child or two? You could ask those types of questions and have them build that out. And the whole thing is to get them to think about what actually is moral according to the Bible. And then you can needle them with little things like, is it really moral to send 42 bears after children to kill them because they insulted somebody's hair or lack of hair? And there's some little things you can needle them with that. But I think mostly it's understanding where your morals come from, and then have them point out how their morals apply to wide areas of modern life, whether it's online, offline. Like I said, trains, planes, automobiles, the trolley problem. And some of this stuff has been around for a while. The trolley problem has been, so that probably won't work too well. But finding ethical questions about how and when to make decisions for planes that affect people and things like that, that's really kind of where you can kind of poke holes at the Bibles. Because the Bible is really... It's a recipe. It's do this, don't do that. It's just a set of rules, and it's not super flexible, and it doesn't really adapt. And so you could even look at, during the Holocaust, was it okay to lie to Germans about Jewish folk living in your home? According to the Bible, that is just as punishable as killing the Jewish folks in your home. It's equally wrong. You're killing human beings, or you're telling a lie that those human beings are there. Either way, by the Bible, that is still wrong, because there's no gray area, right? There's no fudging. There's no context. It's just a rule you follow blindly without thinking about it. And with secular views, we have to think about it. We have to take a lot of stuff into consideration before we can sometimes make a decision on that. Like I said, just go back to the single act of person A hitting person B. Is that moral or immoral? Kind of depends, right? We don't know enough about the context to make that judgment. Sometimes slapping somebody is the only way to get them to snap out of the whatever it is they're in. And sometimes it's consensual. So what you going to do about that? So those are some things you can think about. I think the biggest thing, though, is to get educated on the position itself. And one of the ways you can do them is to ask them lots of questions. And by doing so, they can help them figure out that maybe they don't have all the answers they think they do. And that's basically what straight epistemology is, right? Is basically what I've been describing. So that's where I would go. I don't know about Matt.
I'm going to say one of the things is that, they, morals come from the Bible. Okay, well, they can. The moral positions, the declarations, they could come from the Bible. They could come from another religious book. They could come from a book of poetry. They could come from a conversation that you had with somebody else. The real question is, what makes a certain moral position correct, or the one that we should advocate for? And the people you're talking to are giving the answer that what should make it correct is the fact that it comes from the Bible. And you should push back on that. Because this is just a declaration that, I think the Bible, it's true just because the Bible says so. Well, the Bible advocates for slavery and countless other things that even they would reject.
Exactly. I understand what I understand and agree with everything you guys are saying. There's one thing that is still kind of plagued me, like the whole abortion topic is like, I've had long arguments with my brother constantly about, like, sure, technically, if we do consider like the fetus like at a certain time a human and everything, is it technically immoral to abort and everything? I still don't understand how I can go about having that conversation. Like, how can, like, because on one hand I kind of agree it's a little bit immoral to abort, but at the end of the day I still believe it should be the woman's choice whether or not that they abort. I don't know how to have that conversation, how to convince somebody that it should be everyone's individual choice.
The primary argument is, does a person have the right to control their own body? And if your answer is yes, then the question becomes, under what conditions do they not have that right? So if forcing them to use their body in a way they don't want it to be used will save a life, is that okay under that circumstance? And the answer is, of course, no, because once you're there, where you start making exceptions, right, then you can start asking questions: is what's the difference between control, saying you must carry that baby and you must tote that bale? And you don't want to tote the bale, right? Because that's slavery. What's the difference between these two things?
Right.
Because that's essentially what you're doing, is you're having the woman do something she doesn't want to do with her body. And it doesn't matter if, as a result of that, somebody dies. That's completely irrelevant to the question, because once you start making exceptions to the bodily autonomy right, you start making exceptions for slavery. You're saying it's okay to be someone's slave if it means saving their life. That's literally the only argument. Right. And I say that because, and I'm aware of a lot of the arguments that it's not a heartbeat, it's not anything like that. My problem with a lot of this is that once you have the right genes together, gamete meets egg, right? Once you've got that condition, then we have the potential for a human life. And I don't want to get to the debate of when does life begin. We could say that life begins at that point, and we can give a pro-lifer all of that, because it doesn't matter. It's still a human being, the baby, demanding that the mother use their body for their benefit against her will. That's literally what you're doing.
It's very going to be difficult if you're going to have specific conversations about things like abortion or whatever else. If you're going to talk about what is the foundation of morality, you need to have that conversation and have it separate from the specific moral positions, because as soon as you start digging into specific moral positions, you immediately run this risk of saying, okay, I'm going to pick the moral system that results in the positions that I currently favor, without having a conversation or a thought about why it is that you currently favor one position over another. And so if the conversation is about how do we get to make correct moral positions, if somebody's declaration is, we make correct moral positions by appealing to what the Bible has to say about things, well, what about the things the Bible doesn't address? And what about the things that the Bible, we seem to think, gets wrong? Slavery, equality, misogyny, this parade of stuff. You can go into those specific issues, but the way to address it is to say, so what you're saying is that if the Bible permits something, then it is should be considered morally permissible. If the Bible advocates for something, it should be considered morally good. And if the Bible denounces something or rejects it, then you're saying that that should be considered morally wrong. That's getting them to basically hang their hat on that, that peg is where you need to be in order to address how much the Bible should be or shouldn't be appealed to as a source for moral instruction.
Okay. Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Thanks so much, Kara. I hope that helps you. And by the way, feel free to call back if you find a better way to do it, or if you have success or failure, or maybe there's an explanation that's shorter and quicker, or a pathway that turns out to work better for you when you're having these conversations with family members. I would caution you that don't expect a lot at the beginning. When people are so desperately entrenched in a particular idea or ideology, it takes a lot to get them to even be open to questioning that they might be wrong, especially when it's something that gets to the core of who they are, like a religious idea.
Right. Yeah. I understand that. I understand why it's going to take me a long time. I've been trying to get to my family for the longest time, try to get them to understand positions and opinions outside of their religion and everything, and how everything in the Bible isn't intrinsically, like you said, morally correct and everything. So I really appreciate all the advice and everything, because this is something I've been trying to figure out for the longest times. And I just want to say, I really enjoy your show. I only just started watching about a week ago, but I've been binging this all week, and I loved every single episode. So please continue doing your thing.
Awesome.
I appreciate it.
Well, I'm sure I'll piss you off at some point and you won't like it anymore, but that's the way it goes.
I'm pretty sure I won't get pissed off by you anytime soon.
We'll see. Thanks, Kara. I appreciate the call. I gotta let you go. Thanks so much. We have a handful of other callers calling from all around the world, which is one of the things I love, because one of my favorite places that I've been is New Zealand, and calling in from New Zealand right now is Max. Pronouns are he, him. How you doing, Max? What's going on?
Hi. Yeah, not too bad. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, all things considered.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thanks so much for taking my call. It's my first time trying to call, so I'm quite glad that I got through. Yeah, so my topic is something that's been bothering me for a long time. It's something that I don't have an answer to of how to address it, and mostly about free speech and controlling the spread of misinformation, especially with the COVID pandemic that we're kind of over, but not really. And the spread of misinformation, specifically with the vaccine, that I had a lot of issue with, and I didn't know how to address that, because I saw YouTube videos, well, which is obviously the best source of information, but I saw a person claiming to have a PhD in microbiology, so therefore I thought, well, I should probably listen to that person on this topic, who said that the vaccine was harmful. Then, a couple of days later, I saw another YouTube video debunking this person. I have no expertise in this area. And so now I'm stuck with, this person says that, who claims to have a PhD. This person says another thing, who has a PhD. I don't know who to believe. And yeah, so at the same time, I was thinking, well, if somebody does find evidence for harm, then shouldn't that come up? And I think, yes, it should. But yeah, it's a difficult issue that I don't know how to approach. So I was wondering if you have any pointers. And this isn't just specific about the vaccine itself. This is just an example, right? So,
Right.
So I was wondering if you have any advice in that area.
Yeah, I think when you're trying to do person A says and person B says, whether it's on YouTube, in person, the format doesn't matter. Then, yeah, looking at their qualifications helps. And when you see microbiology and someone is talking about virology, that's not necessarily a good one-to-one mix. And so you got to make sure the background matches. But any individual can be wrong, and they can be right for the wrong reasons, which I still think makes them wrong. And that's a different topic. But so you're looking at, what do the consensus of scientists go with, and can the consensus of scientists still be wrong? Sure, that's very possible. But you go with the consensus because, like you pointed out, you don't always have time to become an expert in the field. And even if you do have time to become an expert in the field, doesn't necessarily mean you're right. And so you go with the consensus. And so that's what you try and find out, what the consensus is. And for pandemics and things like that, for medical advice, you have organizations like the CDC in the United States, World Health Organization, and other large groups like that will offer opinions and recommendations and things like that, that are generally going to be what the consensus is. And then bureaucracies are a double-edged sword. One of the good things about a bureaucracy is they tend to avoid making outrageous claims. Doesn't mean they are successful at that, but they do try to at least avoid that. And so they try, and you have more consensus in putting stuff out because you have more eyeballs on it. And so I will try not to look at what any one individual says. And in some topics, it's all you can do because the topic is so small. So, history of the Bible and things like that, not a huge consensus. Virology, huge consensus there. There's a lot of people studying viruses and have been studying viruses and how they spread for, entire portions of their lives. And so that's who you kind of want to pay attention to is, the organizations and what the consensus says is your best bet.
Okay. Yeah. So what also happened? I don't know if this is true, but what I've heard is that apparently some scientists or doctors were sort of, for lack of a better word, silenced with the threat of their jobs. And again, I don't know if this is correct, but it was a concern for me, and just the idea of threatening somebody with their job because they said they gave a different opinion to the consensus just kind of had me questioning, how do we know, or how are these things evaluated, right? So, I'm pretty new when it comes to these things. So I'm not, like I said, it's going sort of towards the conspiracy route, and I admit that's probably not the best way to go. But yeah, I just don't really feel equipped to really make a definite statement one way or the other. So,
right. In those cases, I think you look at what the person said and what the consensus is. If, for instance, I'll pick on the CDC for personal reasons, and not negative ones, are actually quite positive. But let's say the CDC threatens to fire a researcher because they are claiming ivermectin is good for you and will cure COVID. There's a real good reason to threaten that person, because apparently they are they're completely wrong. Ivermectin has never been shown to be effective. Some of the studies supporting that idea have been thoroughly debunked as just being bad studies. And so you kind of want to look at that. And again, you're going with the best that you can. And so look at the organization. The CDC and World Health Organization and organizations like that have really, really good reputations and have had good reputations for decades as being some of the best in their field and doing really, really good research. They're probably not going too far off the rails when they threaten to fire somebody for going against the herd, so to speak. And it also doesn't mean that person isn't right. It's entirely possible, but because sometimes scientists are human. Well, no, actually, let's rephrase that. They're always human, and so they may have a hard time believing that they were wrong. But the time to believe something and to accept something as true is when you have sufficient good evidence. And for a field that you don't want to be an expert in, don't want to take the time to go and read all the research and make your own decision by reading all that research, then again, you're kind of stuck with, well, sometimes the best evidence is consensus, and most of the time that's the case. Especially today. I mean, if it was 100 years ago, it'd be a lot more iffy because we didn't have as good of protocols for for science and things like that. So that's still what you're looking at is consensus. Like I said, unless you go read the actual research.
I tell you, Max, this has been something that's been incredibly frustrating for me, because when I grew up, it was yay science, and now we live in a world where we have access to more science and better science and better information and more accurate information than ever before, and it's more accessible than ever before, and yet it is more dismissed and more easily dismissed because not only have we had the let's put people in a lab coat and in order to sell stuff, but you can find a somewhat legitimate expert to take almost any side of almost any position that's out there, whether it's election fraud, whether it's vaccination information, any of those things. And so this is a question that I've been asked essentially in one way or another, I don't know, hundreds of times over the course of doing these shows, which is how do I figure out which experts to trust, and how do I convince someone else of which experts I should be listening to? And I don't know, because I'm clearly failing at it, because the world, Jim and I were lamenting the fact that the world not only isn't the way we wanted, it's not the way we thought it was or what we expected, and we don't know what to do about it. And so when people, you're having these conversations with people and they're like, hey, who should I pay attention to? Who should I trust? Or why do you trust this source? All you can do is try to make the case for what convinced you about it, and then compare the information that they're going to come up with and what convinced them, and say which one of these is on stronger ground. Like Jim was saying, there's little we can do beyond going with consensus. And the key thing I would think is to get people to recognize that you shouldn't, your confidence in a particular idea should be proportional to both the evidence for it, the consensus for it, and your ability to understand it. And so when somebody tells me, oh, we just proved that the universe is not locally real, which is some new scientific finding that I'm not even going to pretend that I fully understand. Hell, I may not even partially understand it. I've been terrified that somebody's going to call in here and say, hey, did you see the news that science has declared the universe isn't locally real? Because I don't understand the subject enough to have any sort of opinion on it. So my opinion is I don't know what to think about that. I'm going to keep exploring it. And if the people that you're having difficulty getting to accept sources that you would consider reliable are coming at you with concerns like that, what I find is most often useful is to say, okay, let's set aside what the actual issue is, whether it's ivermectin or whatever it is, and talk about how we're going to go about what sources we should accept and why. And if the data actually show this, if the data from these sources, oh, well, that's a government source. Yeah, well, governments do a lot of research. Do you have some reason to think that because data, which was done independently by real people, let's stop pretending the government is an us and them situation. At least in the United States and in other countries, we have participatory governments, and it's our neighbors and friends who are not only voting for, but also running for those elections. If we can elect Marjorie Taylor Greene twice, if we can have really close races with Lauren Boebert and Herschel Walker, then surely we can recognize that the government is not just an elitist group with a conspiracy there. We're 50-50 on nearly everything. Every one of these races, with the exception of a couple, we're separate by only a couple of points, which shows dramatic, vehement disagreement on these issues, which means, can we all be looking at the same sources? Because the old adage of, hey, if a whole bunch of people with outside are touching an elephant and they're all going to describe it different ways, but they're talking about the same thing. If we can use a message like that to try to portray our disagreement as reasonable, then I'm not sure that even pointing to the same sources is going to get us anywhere, because we can look at the same sources and look at the same data and say, yep, that's the world I want. I want the world where the reality TV show host has the nuclear codes and access to information. It's incredibly frustrating. I wish I had a better answer for how to solve it, Max, but I don't, other than continuing to try to make compelling cases and citing consensus as much as possible and pointing to actual data. I think something Jim said earlier about our movement going forward for the Democratic Party, to talk about policies as if they're not Democratic policies. They are the right policies. They are the good policies. They are the evidence-based policies. I think those, you can use something similar in conversations where you're trying to sort out a source. I hope that answered your question and was at least useful.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was having a conversation with somebody, and I thought that my view about it was objectively correct. And after having that conversation with that person, I thought, oh crap, maybe I'm not as right as I thought I was. And so then I sort of started to doubt. But what you're saying does make sense. So I think I've got a little bit more learning to do in that aspect.
It's a constant battle to always learn more information to make as informed a decision as possible. So yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah. All right. Hey, thanks for. I appreciate that you're taking my call and talking to me. So I'll have a think about it. Maybe if I come up with something better, then if you don't mind, then I'll just call back. And otherwise,
sure.
Yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yep. Right. Cheers. Thanks, Max. And if you find a better solution than what Jim or I are able to come up with, we would love to hear it too, I think. But much appreciated. Yeah, I've gotten to where, I mean, I'll have the debates and discussions on the shows and other things. But it's like when I still got Barrows signs in my front yard, which I guess I'll go take down tomorrow. And I've still got my Barrows t-shirt, which I still will wear on occasion because I believe that I mean, he got more votes for governor than almost anybody, than anyone who ran for governor anywhere except DeSantis and Abbott. And
Right.
and so that was the split, that he got just a massive number of votes. It's getting to what the truth is. I think I don't want us to live in a post-truth society where we keep suggesting that the truth doesn't matter, or that there's no way to find out what the most probable right answer is. I just wish we'd look at it and say, while we may not have absolute certainty and we may not know what is the absolute correct answer, we still know what the most probable answer is based on the given information. And the fact that it could end up being wrong doesn't matter. It's
Right.
wrong when you have identified that it's wrong. Once upon a time, all the best information suggested that the sun went around the earth. All of the available data suggested that that was the most probable explanation for the sun crossing the sky. And that was wrong. And yet it didn't matter a bit, because you had no other reasonable conclusion to draw. And so you operated under that assumption. And the time to believe that that was incorrect was once the data showed that it was. Now, we live in a world where we know so much more than that. And yet what I see is people suggesting we know less than that. That the discovery of uncertainty and our inability to identify an absolute truth on some things means we're stuck, and that we can't know anything. And I just, that seems, it's absolutely ridiculous to me to suggest that because we can't know everything, that means we know nothing. And because we don't know something with absolute certainty, that we don't have incredible confidence for it. And that because we have flaws and statistical outliers in a data set, that doesn't mean that there's not this obvious trend where, vaccination is not correlated with autism, and yet it is correlated with a reduction in symptoms in cases of, COVID and things.
Yeah, exactly. And 51% confidence is better than 50% confidence. Better to have 90 and better to have 100, but sometimes we're just not going to have that.
Yeah. I got Will in Indiana. Pronouns are he, him. Welcome, Will. What was your question today?
Well, I had a question, hopefully one I can knock out pretty quickly. I have a friend of mine, my brother. I've been friends with him for 20 plus years, and he's a theist. And I've had conversations with religion with him over our entire friendship. And at one point, I had him so furious that he was shaking, the most mad he's ever been in his life. He said something like, Every time I bring something up, you've got me Dawkins every time. I don't know what to do with you. I'm done with this. So I thought that was kind of funny that he says, you got me Dawkins. Anyway, when I throw stuff like things from Leviticus, because where a lot of the kind of more awful things in the Bible are, he'll always throw back in my face, are you a Levite? And I don't know how to refute it.
No,
and I was wondering if you had a strategy or
the answer is no. I'm not a Levite. Why would that matter? Are you suggesting that the instructions in the book of Leviticus only applied to Levites? Because they didn't. And
I think he is. Okay.
Yeah. What's his justification for that? And if something appears as instructional or problematic in Leviticus, and it also appears in Exodus or Deuteronomy or one of Paul's books, does that mean that's the only time it's worthwhile? Mm-hmm. Why does he seem so willing to throw out an entire book? Not just a book, but part of the Pentateuch. I mean, this is the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, the Pentateuch. It's funny that there are so many Christians who are willing to toss out the entirety of the Old Testament, except for, creation, original sin, the 10 Commandments, and the prophecies that they want to point to claim Jesus is the Son of God. they're willing to throw out the rest of it as a matter of convenience. Leviticus isn't, to my understanding, a book that ever only applied to Levites.
Okay, I'll try to do some more research on that.
Even if he did,
maybe.
If that's his case, though, if its case is that whatever's written in Leviticus is only applicable to Levites, cool. Let's not touch Leviticus. Let's go to Exodus. Let's go to Deuteronomy. Let's go to all those other places that are problematic. And what's his excuse for that one? Captain Bible scholar.
Right. Yeah, I think he's kind of gotten away from the nitty gritty of the Bible. He seems to find the more placating nuggets of wisdom, and he'll recite those or he'll quote those a lot. But I kind of got into consuming atheist content and kind of getting more into my deeper into atheism because of him, because he's one of the smartest, most common sense people that I know. And it's like, how do you believe in a religion where a talking freaking snake made a rib woman eat an apple, and that's why we're all going to hell?
There's another,
but
there's another potential take or look at this, which is, when he says something smug like that about, it's not, you don't just have to be like, no, I'm not a Levite. Are you saying that book should be ignored? The position there is that Leviticus is about primarily ritual and structure and the rigid laws and how to actually do stuff. And so if his case is that it doesn't apply anymore, or that it doesn't apply to you, or any of those things, ask him who it applied to, when did it apply, and was it morally correct and good instruction for those people at that time? And if so, why? Because when you have instructions that it's permissible to own slaves as property, which is in Exodus and Leviticus, I believe, and in Deuteronomy as well, a lot of people say, well, that's not right now, but it was right back then. Why? Why was it okay back then to own people? Why was it okay for the priestly class to after they go forth and slaughter the Midianites or whomever, to bring back all the virgin girls and to give some of them to the priest class and keep the rest of them for themselves? What was it that was instructive about that? And why would God ever have instructed that if it was immoral? All right, is there some special rules there? This is someone who just, the truth, Will, is that he's convinced that he knows more about the Bible than you do, and so he can dodge. But you can't dodge if you say, okay, are you saying this doesn't apply and shouldn't apply? And if so, how did you reach that conclusion, and why the fuck was it ever in there to begin with?
Right. Yeah, I try to get away from arguing with him a lot anymore, but it does come up every now and again. So I kind of wanted, to have these things in my arsenal to come at him with next time. He's admitted to me that he believes in the Bible and Christianity and such because he is convinced that he needs a moral authority, because otherwise he would just be a rampant flaming asshole to everyone, because what's the point otherwise? And, part of me doesn't want to disabuse him of the religion, to keep him being a good person. I think he would still be a good person, honestly, but meh. I want to move on to the political what you guys were talking about, what do we do next? Or how do we keep going here? Something I've always been hearing a lot from the Young Turks or Kyle Kowalski at Secular Talk is the Democrats, or even just the left in general, or just not Republicans, are absolutely horrible at messaging. They've got to sharpen up their messaging. They've got to start saying, what we're for, how, and start really exposing, their corruption and their cronyism and all that,
because it's time to start punching below the belt like they do. You know, this whole thing of pardon the term, but pussyfooting around and trying to be, you know, above where they go, it don't work. You know, if you keep trying to play nice, they're going to keep dumping a piss latte with shit syrup and dandruff flakes all over our head and laughing about it, you know? and so that's where I think we got to go. But also, I think we have to really start having better ideas than just, you know, blaming the other, or like an idea I had was a nationalized labor corps. Like, you know, if a person doesn't have like a general direction in their life, someone will always say, well, there's always the Army, you know, or one of the armed forces. Well, why couldn't we establish, you know, some kind of nationalized force where, you know, you go and you get training through the government for a particular, you know, industry or trade, and then, you know, somebody who has need of that, they call the labor board, or they call the labor corps, and, you know, a facilitator finds a person with the requisite skill set, and they lease them out to the person that has the need. And, you know, they're partially subsidized. Their wages are partially subsidized by the government and partially subsidized by whoever's hiring them. So that way they could be.
It sounds like you're describing the job corps.
The job corps is this, so there is something like that, but maybe it's just got no real teeth anymore.
Well, I'm looking at their website, and it is pretty much the largest nationwide residential career training program in the country, operating for more than 50 years. Eligible young people 16 to 24 complete high school education, trains them for meaningful careers, and assists them with obtaining employment. I don't know if they're government or private off the top of my head. They're federal government. Employment and Training Administration, ETA. So, they probably just need to do a better job of advertising.
Maybe we start trying to expand that out and say, you know, because, you know, you always hear they've created so many jobs, you know, something like that. But where? How do I get into these jobs? How am I hired? You know, how do I make money through these phantom jobs that have been created? You know, they always have the number, but where are they? Where's the substance? Where's the meat?
Have you bothered to go Google?
People don't see that. And
have you bothered to investigate that question at all?
I haven't Googled yet.
Okay, so why this is so incredibly frustrating. There, not only does the government actually subsidize a number of different careers and instructions and offset college instruction and vocational instruction, and then there's military instruction and jobs that matter. And so I would imagine that if you Googled, where are these new jobs that have been created, you would find an answer to that. Mm-hmm. And if you haven't bothered to do that, do you know how wild it is to have somebody call in and say, where are all these jobs? If you're not willing to at least go out and look,
right?
What are we doing complaining about it?
Well, this is something that kind of came to right. This is kind of something that came to my brain as I was sitting on hold for another topic of discussion. I'll go ahead and probably look more into the job corps and see, you know, what's going on with that, and you know, get some further ideas. But anyway, the main focus I would say is messaging. You know, the left has to be better at messaging.
I literally typed in where are the new jobs coming from. I literally typed in where are the new jobs coming from in Google, and the first thing that comes up is a CNBC article from May 6th that talks about they're in leisure and hospitality, manufacturing, transportation, warehousing, professional business service. This is just the chart. And then there's a link to the Labor Department report on the 428,000 jobs that were added in May. And it doesn't mean that you're eligible for any of them, but I mean, the answers are out there.
Right.
And it's, you know, there are, while people lament the big government, too much government, we don't need all this. And there's a lot of information that's out there. We have access to more information than ever before. And there are government organizations that are out there giving the information. You just got to, Google is your friend, and whatever government department is putting out the reports is also going to be favorable there. Will, I got to move on.
Well, I will certainly look more into that. Okay. One more very brief question.
No, I got to move on. I got 3 callers waiting. My apologies, but we're close to running over time on this. Steve in Canada, an atheist who lives in a church. Pronouns are he, him. How you doing, Steve?
Giving away too much information. Matt, Jim, thanks for taking my call. How you guys doing?
Oh, I did. It was typed in here. I thought it's meant for me to say. He's not an atheist at all. What's going on, Steve?
Exactly. Well, it's frightening. I guess timely. The conversations previous while I was on hold have been interesting, and they touch on a few things. I felt bad for the guy trying to find out COVID information, but when there are people in organizations that are specifically trying to put out disinformation, it's hard to battle. I think there was about 13 groups that were throwing out disinformation in regards to COVID that I'd seen an article about in that regard. It's not a lot of people in the world, but it's a lot of information they pump out to a lot of people that read it. But I think when I was on hold, I wanted to ask you guys what you thought. I think the most frightening thing now, I guess, is the fact that the evangelical Christian base with the Christian nationalism has come forward in a way that they never really have before, because I think they have the thought that the world's ending and they have to drag all of us along with it. But their proclivity, I guess, to believing something without evidence now has been married together with political will, so that they seem to have the ends justify the beliefs. And it doesn't really matter whatever, like Herschel Walker or, any one of these guys that they're putting forward. I was going to say something, but I won't. But I mean, like they're willing to believe anything. They're willing to believe Jewish space lasers and invasions and that children in Wayfair cabinets and all this horse shit that they're putting out. And they're willing to believe that, and they're willing to believe in everything else. So you marry that together with this Christian nationalism with the political will, and you've got some siloed, nobody can tell them anything different, a group of individuals that are bulldozing their way through the planet. And then how do you fight that other than trying to purvey the truth as much as possible? Because, I mean, if you really look at Donald Trump's record or any one of them, it's vapid, it's nothing, it's steam. It's all promises and it's all bullshit. So how do you fight that?
I don't know.
One person at a time. And one show at a time, and one article at a time, and one TV appearance if you're going to manage it, just one thing at a time. And if you multiply that times 1,000, then that's 1,000 people. It's 1,000 articles, 1,000 conversations you can have. I think in the past I've been willing to say, if you're not willing, that's okay. And I am becoming less and less okay with people not being willing. I think that you do have to be ready to have some of those conversations, or at least ask questions. You don't have to be confrontational about it. You don't have to do it the way Matt and I do it on the show. You can do it very, very low key, and you just simply ask good questions and know what questions to ask, and then be educated. And it's hard. It's hard to keep up with everything. It's a second full-time job. Sometimes it seems like to me, trying to keep up on all the things I'm interested in out there. But it's just, it's one day at a time, because that's how they got to where they are, right? Is they went after the school boards, and they went after and changed the curriculum, and then made it okay for homeschooling, and then made the homeschooling rules change to them. And now you've got a bunch of kids being raised with all of this. And so it just happens just little bit by little bit. Some of these people, back in the 80s would have been laughed at. Trump was laughed at. Every time he floated the idea of being president. And I think there's a good case to be made that he's an accidental president, that he didn't announce his run and do everything with the intention of winning. But, who knows? Maybe he did. He's enough of a narcissist, right? But I think that's how you do it, is be willing to have tough conversations. It's no longer okay to say, well, you don't talk about politics, religion, what's the three? Politics, religion, or sports. No, let's talk about politics. Let's talk about religion. Let's talk about the hard things. And let's learn to have civil conversations as much as possible. You don't have to be confrontational. You don't have to have the types of debates that Matt and I do. You can do it the way, with straight epistemology, you can do it very, very low key. But I think everybody has to be involved in the conversation.
I feel your frustration, Steve. And as somebody who's in the thick of it, basically the only thing I can do is try to come up with ideas and then put them into practice and see how they work. And over the many years that I've been doing this, I have sort of a mental calculator of what things are resonating with different people, what sort of things get responses. And when you say people are believing things without evidence, I agree that they are reaching conclusions based on insufficient evidence, but they're absolutely convinced that they have evidence. And the example that I'm going to use from this week, that kind of shows the level of, I'm working on a video called Honestly Dishonest, because I watched some stuff from Jordan Klepper where he went out and he talked to Trump supporters. And he was talking to this one woman about the January 6th, and she was portraying that it was a peaceful event, and she was there and she saw it. And Jordan kind of laid into her a little bit and pointed out, so what about, the footage of them breaking windows and storming the Capitol and violently attacking Capitol Police? And she said something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing, that when she got home from her January 6th excursion, her peaceful excursion, she saw the footage on the TV and she told whoever was there with her to turn it off because that's not what happened. And he's like, are you suggesting that this was like some George Lucas-y CGI stuff? And she's like, could have been. What's happening in that situation, to the best of my ability to understand it, is that she went there with a particular mindset. She saw the people around her who perhaps weren't being violent, and then does not believe that the other thing represents the other people like her. Those weren't people like me. That wasn't my group. That didn't happen. That was fictional. And so not only is she doing this, I'm going to believe what I saw with my own eyes, not what I see on the news or not what I hear from somebody else. And we, by and large, we're all going to be that way. If Jim's sitting here and if Jim and I were having a conversation before the show, and I watched him punch somebody in the face and it weren't recorded, but I saw it with my own eyes, and then Jim tried to say, oh, I didn't do that, I'd be like, I stood here and watched you. Am I not supposed to believe my own eyes? We put a lot of emphasis on that. And one of the key differences, I think, between the three of us, perhaps, if we're all going to be in a bucket, and the woman that Jordan Klepper was interviewing, is that they prize personal testimony over data, especially their own personal testimony. And I prize data over personal testimony, including my own, because I know that I have flawed memories about things. I know there are things, like I have some documents that I put in my Google Keep folder that are a complete timeline with links to various emails and everything for any issue that is really important that I know I don't want to forget. Here's what happened. And maybe in a year or so, somebody's going to ask me what happened with this. And I can say, you know what, instead of just being stuck with, I don't remember, I can say, here's what I wrote down at the time. And here's the links to this. I don't do that for everything. I mean, it's ridiculous, but for important things, I do that because I know how flawed eyewitness testimony is. And they not only don't seem to know how flawed it is, they're going to trust it and trust their own after more than both of them, more than the data that they see. And so if I was there with Jordan when that woman said that maybe it was CGI, I would say, do you really think the technology has advanced to the point where somebody can create a computer generated violent attack on the Capitol and put it out live on TV, because this was going out live? And if she pushed back with a yes, I was there, I saw that wasn't happening, I would say, okay, this footage is happening on the steps of the Capitol. Here's an overhead map of this. Show me where you were. Is it possible that this was happening in a place where you could not see it, that you were standing somewhere else? Because people will be like, I was in DC that day. Okay, well, maybe you were at a Starbucks 5 miles away from what was going on, and so you didn't see or hear anything related to this. Maybe you're hanging out with a couple other demonstrators, and instead of being at the Capitol, maybe you were right outside the White House where there wasn't necessarily that going on. People conflate things. They're like, I was there, I know better. And you have to ask the right questions to get them to recognize that we're not saying you're wrong. We're not saying you weren't peaceful. We're not saying that where you were, things weren't peaceful. We're talking about something else that happened in the same city somewhere else. And then somebody in chat was like, how about she's a liar? Yes, it's entirely possible that some of them are just dishonest. If they're willing to be that honestly dishonest with themselves, if they're willing to say, hey, I turned it off because I didn't want to see that because it wasn't the truth, that is being honest about their dishonesty. And that gives them the illusion that they're honest, because they're willing to tell you when they're dishonest, which must mean they're honest. We've got to get to the point where we can say the fact that you are wrong does not mean you are stupid, does not mean you are lying, does not mean you are evil. You're just wrong. And here's the data.
You know, it really hurts my feelings just to have you say those words to me, Matt.
Yes. And if I cared more about your feelings than I care about the truth, that would impact me.
Exactly. Well, you know, I totally agree with you, and I think that I put more blame. Like I don't blame people who believe in religion, or I don't blame people who believe the bullshit that's pervaded by the GOP lately. What I blame is the people that purvey the crap, and with purpose and sinister intent. They know what they're doing is wrong. Like I worked my adult career in advertising, so I know the power of persuasion, and the technology that's available over the last decade is tremendous. And they know every move you make, so they can make you feel like if you click on the color blue and you say you like blue, they're going to show you every shade of blue until you think there's no other color on earth. And that's what's happening. People are so deeply siloed in this horse shit that they can't even see. And the religious folk, they're so inculcated in the belief of Jesus, and it's the same thing they loaded over to the Republican Party. And I believe so much in Trump because he was sent from God. They actually say that. Can you imagine people saying Donald fucking Trump was sent from God? I mean, yeah. Then that's what I'll say, my friends, and thank you for taking my call.
Thanks, Steve.
You know,
and to answer your question, the Bible's pretty clear that all leaders are appointed by God. So yeah,
including Joe Biden.
I appreciate the call. Yeah, it's so weird that the Bible will be all leaders are God appointed, or they're part of God's plan. There's a number of different ways that may or may not get phrased, but if God has a plan and everything goes according to plan and nothing can't go according to God's plan, then yeah, Trump was sent by God, and so was Hitler and everybody else. This is all part of
Stalin.
Oh, yeah. I just got a message from Jimmy. My apologies. There are two people on hold, and one of them has been on hold for quite a while. We are very, very low on time. And so the two callers that are on hold right now, I'm going to ask you guys to call back next week if you can, or some other week if you can. And we'll do what we can to get you put through first. I'm sure we're going to continue talking about politics and everything else, but I've kept Jim here for a long time. We need to get through some super chats and wrap things up for tonight. Otherwise, this way we always leave you wanting more. So if you didn't get your call through today, just call us back next week, but I greatly appreciate that. And and I'm dropping
and
call-ins
to the real quick to the caller who disagrees with my presidential endorsements. I wasn't endorsing anybody. I was just coming up with candidates off the cuff that might be better than Joe Biden. Those weren't endorsements by any stretch of the imaginations.
You should check out
I'm
Nina
sure you had
Turner.
more time to give it. Sorry, what was that, Jimmy?
I was saying to Jim, check out Nina Turner. Bernie Sanders is more likely to endorse her than to run again, probably.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Nina
On that
Turner.
note, though,
Okay,
I still appreciate the calls. And I know that Jim's not going to be back next week, or at least maybe, who knows, maybe Jim will be back next week. You never know. But if there was one call that was specifically for Jim, I think he's already addressed it. And that's why I love having him on as a co-host, because even when we got to move on, he at least gets a sentence in to get an answer out to somebody. And I appreciate that. We have some super chats to read. And let's get it going here. $10 from James Call. Nevada Measure 1, the Equality Amendment, is reading 5742. Nevada Equality Amendment. Oh, that's the one I don't have. Is that Nevada 1? Yes, Nevada Measure 1 did not come up on our list. And so I still don't know enough about it. I know we talked about it last night, but please forgive me. Last night was 6 hours, and for a chunk of it, I was medicated. And for all of it, I was sad. And so I missed part of the Nevada Measure 1, the Equality Amendment. But yes, thanks for the update. Much appreciated. There we go. 6667 from Fuka DWF. Thanks, Matt and Jim. So good to see you, and thanks so much for a generous conversation. I'm thrilled that you made it here. Jim's here.
Having a blast as always. Yeah.
We should alternate, so I'll let you take the next one, as is tradition.
$9.99 from Shannon MC. I live in Magaville, Texas, and I think Abbott won because people want to keep their guns. They see any type of even slight gun control as people coming for their guns. Their guns are the top concern. I don't disagree. I also live in Magaville, Texas. That's probably a huge issue. And they made it sound, and I don't think Beto helped himself with some of his comments either. But yeah, that could be very, very true. Gerrymandering helps too. But that's definitely a concern.
I don't think it did that. If you look at the demographics of everything else that happened in the state, I don't think that if you just changed Beto to pro-gun, it would have changed much.
No, and I don't know if Jimmy is everybody else able to hear you and not just us?
Yeah, I've learned my lesson on that, so Matt won't yell at me anymore.
Okay.
Gosh.
Yeah. So I don't disagree with that. But he said some things publicly that I don't think helped that either. But I think you're right. If you changed it in pro-gun, then that wouldn't have changed much. But
what's funny is, honestly, if anything, he actually got a boost back because of Uvalde for being anti-gun, that we actually saw his polling improve there. Now, did all of it fall off between now and then? Probably, but he did get a boost.
Yeah. I will say that somebody in chat asked a one-word question that really made me think, which is, they just said gerrymandering ? And genuinely, when it comes to the race for Texas governor, I don't think gerrymandering is or could ever be relevant, because it is a straight everybody in Texas vote. So there's no districting that has any impact on the governor election.
You're probably right. Yeah, you're right. That I completely misspoke. Yep. Well,
I hadn't even thought of that. I just let it pass. So the person who asked that question, which is already passed, yes, gerrymandering is a huge problem in a number of cases, but in something for like governor, it really can't be unless I'm missing something.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't think of it either. So I'm going to bet Jimmy didn't think of it either. But
I was listening poorly, but no. Only 3 left, people. Get them in now. Let's. They said they want to end soon. Let's take that away from them. Let's pay them to stay.
Oh, Yes, I see some big ones coming in, so they may think that, oh, there's no sense in me asking my question. Matt will never read it. I will. But 6667 from Fuga DWF. In California, the only voting restriction I saw was actual rain. For sure, Prop 1 and anti-props 26 and 27 drove turnout. Positive messages work best with secular education, in my opinion, but fear of losing rights or money works for so many too. One-on-one talks have worked for me. Thanks, Fergal Burgle. I wish there was the time and energy to make those one-on-one conversations more accessible. Like, even if you got every convinced secularist, reasonable Democrat to go out and talk to one individual who disagrees with them about this, I wonder what the impact would be. I'm not trying to be cynical, and I'm definitely not saying I have the right answer or anything else. It's just that I watch people absolutely buying into propaganda all over the place. I just did a podcast the other day where I talked about this, where somebody heard that they were going to have me on the podcast, and they were like, oh, Matt's terrible. He once did this, he was willing to work with Sargon of Akkad. And it's like, that's literally the opposite of what actually happened. Somebody heard something and decided to run with it and try, because they didn't like me for whatever reason, decided to spin it in a different direction. Sargon and I were both at a convention. I sat down and had a conversation with him at the pre-convention dinner, where 3 or 4 people hung out around us listening to the conversation. And while we were talking about the basics of philosophy, there was agreement. And the second we got on another subject, there was disagreement, where he then tried to cite that he was right because he had more followers on YouTube or wherever. And I got up and walked away, and then did an hour-long video denouncing him and the conference and everything else afterwards. So it's like, oh, no, I heard that Matt did this, or I heard that so-and-so did this. They're doing that. It's not just for me. It's for anybody. Oh, I heard Elon Musk did this. Or I heard Jordan Peterson did this. I heard Biden did this. I heard Brandon did this. I heard Trump did this. It's all I heard. And in some cases, they get it exactly backward. I'm not quite at the point of giving up. But outside of, like, I'm glad there was somebody who was asking, like, when is violence justified? And I don't have a good answer for that. And I'd rather never see violence. And I'd rather never see either a violent insurrection or a violent revolution or a civil war or anything else. But there comes a point where I run out of options. And my options then are either violence or give up. And I will always lean towards giving up before violence, which I think is one of the things that separates me from the people I'm in opposition with. It's like, oh, if they're going to go low, we should go low. I really hope not. But optimism isn't getting us there.
No, but in regardless to the violence issue, I think Asimov said it best, or was it Asimov? I forget. Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. And sometimes, we're going to be incompetent. We don't, we're not always going to be as competent as we should be, but it should always be that last refuge. It should never, ever, and we should always try to find ways around it, because ultimately violence doesn't prove you right or wrong. It just proves you're alive at the end of it. And it's almost always a Pyrrhic victory.
I have no problem with self-defense and defense of others and things like that. I mean, if I shouldn't be in a fight with anybody. I'm nonviolent. I'm not in shape. Pretty much anybody who wanted to could probably kick my ass. And yet, in defense of myself or others, I will at least, while I wouldn't engage in violence, or at least engage in physical restraint, perhaps. Maybe I can be really good at putting people in a headlock to stop them from hurting others. I don't know. But man, I really wish, Fuka, that one-on-one conversations worked, and I'm glad they're working for you. And I hope that we get a million more people, a billion more people like you, who can do it and have it work for them. Because right now we live in a culture that is swarming with lies, misinformation, completely unfounded rumors and bigotry where it's just, here's what the Dems want to do. Here's what the Republicans want to do. And if we'd stop talking about the motivation and actually start talking about the practical effect of this, it's a mistake to say Republicans want to punish women for their biology, in my opinion, because they look at it as, we're not punishing women for the biology. We're just recognizing that there's a baby there. And so instead, if you say that Republicans want to implement laws that have the effect of punishing women for their biology, and this doesn't dissuade them, now you've accurately described what's happening without pretending like you're a mind reader. But thanks, Fuka. Wow, $100 from Maximilian. Wow. It's amazing. I greatly appreciate you for your support. Thank you both for your continued efforts to make this world a better place. I ain't stopping.
Nope.
I found out, after I announced that I was no longer going to be doing Atheist Experience, there were a bunch of people that didn't know that I did this show or the Sunday show or any number of things like that. And so we're getting the word out. But the first thing that happened, because I didn't give any details, somebody was like, I started getting messages from people who are like, is this a health issue thing? Are you okay after the heart attack? Enjoy your retirement and all this other stuff. And I was like, bitch, I ain't retiring. I'm not even slowing down. I'm doing more than I was before. I'm just doing it in different places with different people.
I'm going to work Matt into the goddamn ground.
Yeah, well, I'm fine with Jimmy doing that because I don't have any retirement plan, so I'm going to do this till I drop dead. And believe me, the day that I drop dead on air, working to make a better world, I will do it with as close to a smile on my face as I can, assuming there's not like a massive amount of pain from a coronary or something. But
if your last words,
it didn't faze me at all.
If your last words aren't no, I'm done, then yes, it'll have been a life wasted.
Assuming I have any opportunity to utter life final words, I will strive to make sure those are the words. Is that it for the super, Jimmy?
Two more.
There we go.
Thanks to both of you. Voices of Reason in a Crazy World. $49.99 from Emma M.
Hey, Emma M.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
We appreciate it, and we try to be voices of reason. Occasionally, we screw up, like I did earlier.
Yeah.
In New Zealand, her name is pronounced Imium. It's funny to me. I don't give a shit.
I know. Your quirky fascination with a New Zealand accent when it comes to Imineems is amusing. But I heard it last night. So.
Thank you.
$10 from YouTuber Grudge. I really want to thank you. I did seek therapy and feel better in so many ways. Oh my gosh, thank you. I grew up. That's the last one, right, Jimmy?
Yes, correct.
All right, let me wrap up today like this. First of all, a huge thank you to our moderators in chat, and to Jimmy for producing this, and to Jim for agreeing to come on to help out. I love doing a show with you. I can't wait to get you back again soon. But for YouTube Grudge and everybody else, I grew up in a family where mental health issues were viewed as if there was something fundamentally wrong with you, or as a satanic influence. If you needed to go, and the people who were in therapy were just rich elitist people who couldn't put their big boy and big girl panties on and deal with their stuff. Depression wasn't a mental health issue. It was just, you're sad, buck up and get over it. Get your ass back to work. You've got stuff to do. This was the mindset of both my immediate family and people that I knew and interacted with at church, etc. Satan would punish you for doing good according to God, and God would punish you for not doing good according to God. And the world was tough, and the world wasn't fair, and nobody owed you anything, and you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And these are individuals who thought that homeless people were just lazy people trying to leech money off of everybody else in society. They're not doing anything. They don't deserve anything. And God says, he who does not work shall not eat. And it was just absolutely the most vile and disgusting self-promotional fucking high horse I could imagine from close relatives who would say that they were talking out of love. Immediate family members who would say that this is what love is. I'm so glad that I managed to get out from under the stigma that they put on everything, right down to mental health issues. And so when you write in to suggest that something I said, something I suggested, encouraged you to actually get help, and getting help actually helped, I couldn't be happier. It's more important to me than whether or not you agree with me on politics or religion. All of those things are important. But the fact that somebody needed help, and rather than being maligned for a mental health issue, no matter how severe it was, rather than being stigmatized for it, they got out from underneath it and got help. That means that I said the right thing. And it makes up for a number of times when I probably haven't said the right thing, including tonight. There was one moment in chat where I said something that I viewed as clever, as a way of, let's lightly just get rid of this and end this kind of conversation we had on. And I kind of regret it. And all of us are going to say the wrong thing on occasion. But man, when you say the right thing and it truly helps somebody, that's the reason to keep doing this. And so I'll be back next week. I don't know who my guest is going to be. I don't know what the shape of the world's going to be. I will have an update on what's happened in the week over the elections as we get more and more results. Remember, there are multiple runoffs that are going to happen. We're going to have a runoff in Austin for mayor. We're going to have a runoff in Georgia. If you are in Georgia, if you are around Georgia, if you know somebody in Georgia, if you think you have a friend who might know somebody in Georgia, it's time to start getting the word out that this may determine who is going to control the United States Senate. I'll be back on Sunday for the Sunday show from 3 to 4:30 Central. And tune in tomorrow. Josie's hosting
Friday.
Sorry, when?
It's going to be Friday now with Arden and Ben.
Wow, okay. So Transatlantic Call-In Show has been moved to Friday with Arden and Ben. Congratulations. Evidently that changed while I was sitting here doing this. But it's right here on the line. The line is the network. This show is the hang up. You're the people who make it all happen. And tune into the other shows, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.